Anybody else on a QVGL session?
I'm trying to log in.
Oh my God, it's taking forever.
Yeah, it was a big problem since.
Yeah.
Are you having trouble logging in or getting the VGL session to start? Like after you.
The VGL session's not. I'm trying to. It says waiting for immediate job to be scheduled, so it's just hanging there. Alfonso, you know. Oh, there it goes. Oh my goodness, that takes forever. Okay, 1 second.
When you open it, do you ask for anything other than default number of cores or anything like that?
Right now, no.
No. I just asked for a runtime of 96. That was in the SEC, so I went with that. That was in the usage guide that Jason had. So I went.
We're limited to 48.
Technically, they don't want us to do more than 48.
Oh, I followed the. I'll change that.
They can go to hell. It's ridiculous.
I also don't always feel like it stays connected for 96
they can
hours.
say
I
that.
do that. Yeah.
If you put more than 48, I haven't had the nerve to put more than 96. 96 covers a good chunk of a single week.
Yeah.
But
It's
if
really
they,
annoying if you're in the middle of something.
it's ridiculous. So I would say do as much as you want and see what they say. If they push back.
I haven't gotten binged yet for 96, so.
If this is part of it, you kind of had to go over there. I actually think it's worth the move, but I signed up for 96 hours, so it's less annoying for me to have to restart it as often. So I think something where you can start it on Monday morning and it's going to be around for most of the week is reasonable enough expectation.
Okay. Oh my God, it's loaded. So I guess the thing that I'm hoping to do is if we could just pull up the ROI plots that I made and then just see, Jason, if they make sense to you, and then take a look back at my config files and just make sure that everything is right. And then we can, make sure that if it's a config file issue or just a subject study specific issue. Okay, let's see. Okay, well, actually, let me just go through what I did so we can just look at the config files because that's probably more helpful. Okay. Okay, so my pre-processing was the free surfer pipeline. Reasonable. So Jason, I think that's just what you gave me.
Yep.
Okay. And then
so what's different about it being free surfer is that it's subject space?
Yeah. So we're not converting to MNI space at any point.
And the full free surfer pipeline, in addition to these steps, also does the extraction of the functional data on the cortical ribbon, and then it does some additional smoothing on the cortical ribbon itself. But this pipeline doesn't do that because it doesn't want to run surface-based analysis. It only wants to get everything in subject space.
Okay, and then I did. So this was the first level. I did the full smoothing. I guess I only had one smoothing level in the free surfer pipeline anyway. So, right, so 2 or 1 would have been the same here for a functional smoothing level?
Yes, exactly, yes.
Okay, so it is 4 millimeter smooth, okay. And then, so that was my first level. And then for
And this is an sparse acquisition, I guess, because you don't have any like HRF or anything like that, right?
Yes, yes. And then let me do the second level. And then, so this was my second level, and I did it this way instead of doing control 1, patient 0, motion 0, because we had said this would be better sort of formatting if you're not assuming that your two groups have the same variance. Is that correct?
Right. So you,
right. The other option would have been.
But is the motion defined only within controls, or it is also defined within patients?
It's defined within both of them. Oh yeah, it's centered across all participants.
Right, but that is still going to introduce, if you use just control and motion, it's still going to use all subjects for that analysis, just because the motion covariate has some values on it. So it kind of assumes.
Okay.
So if you want to only use it within the controls, you need to create like a motion specific for only controls. So just create a covariate that only has motion variables for the control subjects and has zeros for everybody else. And then if you introduce that, basically control and motion within controls, just those two elements in the design, that will include only those subjects that you want.
Oh, I guess I had assumed because, I see. I had assumed because my have a 0, because I have a control.
Right, but the rule of thumb, so the general rules for determining which subjects go into the analysis, when you specify like you want all subjects and you only want to be constrained by the design elements that you introduce, is that it has two rules to determine which subjects to eliminate or include in the analysis. If any subject has not a number or a missing value in any of the things that you include in the designs, so I don't know, if you enter a none for motion covariate for one subject, the subject is going to be removed. That is one of the rules for removing subjects in analysis. And the other rule is if all of the things that you introduce in the design, they have to be all of them, not just one of them. If all of them have value of 0 for one particular subject, that subject gets removed. So if you have a covariate that has like control covariates that has 1s for controls and 0 for patients, and you only introduce that covariate, then all of the ones that have zeros, because that is basically zeros for all of the things in the design, they are going to be removed. But if you enter something like controls and motion has some non-zero values for patients, then those values are going to still be there, because the rule is that all of the things have to have 0 values for a subject to be removed. So that's why in this case that doesn't work. You need to, but if you introduce a new covariate in your participants TSV, that is motion within controls only, and another one for motions within patients only, and then in your design here you introduce controls and motion within controls, then both of those covariates are going to have 0 values for the patients, so those subjects are going to be removed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I probably wouldn't want to do that, because I do want to center motion across everybody. So
right, you can still center motion at whichever value you want. You only have to have basically the actual non-zero values to be only within controls. Okay. So what is the 0 level of that covariate is arbitrary. It's up to you basically to determine, but it has to have 0 values for the patients. Otherwise, the patients are still going to be included. And you can actually double check that by looking at the logs of your second level analysis, and it's going to tell you how many subjects are in the analysis and all that. So that would be like a hint that. Okay. Not what you were expecting was happening there.
I see. But this is okay to do then, if I do this then?
Yeah, but that is perfectly fine as well. Okay. Yeah, that would also work. Yeah.
Okay. And then when I do the ROI analysis for this one, you had said not to run the second level, just start with second level.ROI.
Right. For this, if you try to start with actually running the second level analysis, it's going to complain that it cannot do that, because.
So I think let me show you. It has a little error, but I have a workaround for that. So let me just show you what it does right now. Maybe it'll start working.
Okay, excellent.
I find that usually when I do this, it gets confused, probably because there's no sort of initial folder created. And then well, maybe it'll work now. What I was doing was I was running the second level, letting the error sort of throw, because the folder started, and then running the second level ROI. So I think it was just.
That is also a way to, I think you can get away with that working actually, because when it stops. So basically, when you run a second level thing, it runs two blocks of analysis. One of them is kind of like the non-parametric, fully multivariate analysis, and one of them is the parametric, all univariate SPM type of analysis. And the second portion, the SPM-based, is the thing that breaks in this case because it expects your subjects to be in the same space, which are not. But since the first portion runs anyway, you probably can get away with doing that. But anyway, show me the bug because there is going to be a bug in the code if you are getting an error when running the ROI thing.
Yeah, I think it was because here. Let me.
I mean, yeah. In this case, it's not going to go through that portion because the analysis already exists in the SPM math file, so it's not going to try to redo it. Probably you can recreate. Right, you can probably recreate the error by changing the name of the analysis.
And then we can look at those ROI analysis.
Yeah, exactly, and that is going to complain.
Yeah, so it does that.
Oh, that's a stupid thing. Okay, that's a typo. Sorry about that. So
I noticed this
before.
Oh.
Yeah, well, that was lame of me. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll fix it.
Well, then I said, well, as soon as if I run the second level, and then that's fine. Okay, so then this JSON is what I'm getting. This was just left hemisphere. I didn't put them all in. So what this is, let me pull it back up again.
Though actually, just that error, will that error come up in any case, or?
No, it's only when it's running ROI analysis and it's ready it's telling you that it doesn't find the SPM math file and it wants to run. It's gonna, well, if it wouldn't be because of that error, it would actually run the second level analysis, the portion that it needs.
Right. So if I do this, that usually works because it creates a blank file. But
right, I fixed that. Yeah, I just need to upload it.
Okay. Well, I thought I fixed it, but it doesn't really matter because that's what it is. Yeah. Okay. So what I had done for this one was the individuals SL Park BG ASEG files. Alfonso, I hadn't changed it to try the new, just the shortening it yet.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah,
but I'll let you know when I do.
Give it a try. It's just for debugging purposes.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, no problem.
And then I just labeled these. And then the other thing that I did, well, here we can look at that one, and then I can show you the grouped one because I have a question about the group. So then the only things that pass correction are these two over here. Yeah. And if I do right and left hemisphere, take both of them, I don't think they pass, but I can. So how surprising is that based on the fact that, like, I guess, like, that's my question is.
Yeah, this doesn't look very good. This is a basic speech minus baseline result, right?
Or just the control group, yeah, but yes.
Right, and even if you're controlling, what is the zero level of the emotion? Is it that a heavy control? If you don't introduce emotion, does it still show the same thing, or is it mostly because of the motion control?
Well, that's a good point. I haven't done it without the motion control because I know that the autism subjects don't mean much without it, but that's a good point. Why don't I just run that right now? Oh, and here's my second question before we go to that. If I did this as a group, would that, so let me pull up my group one. So those are the ones that I would want to go into it. And then I made sort of a left speech network group. Would the idea be it would treat them all like one ROI and therefore it wouldn't correct for everything? Or how does that kind of work?
So grouping is just so when you introduce the list of specific ROIs that you want to enter into analysis using the ROI _ labels thing, you are selecting a subset of ROIs that are going to enter into analysis. The analysis is performed separately for every individual ROI, and then you have an FDR correction that corrects across multiple comparisons because all of the many different ROIs that you enter. If you have 100 ROIs, you have to correct for those 100 analyses. When you do grouping, what you are doing is changing the individual units of the analysis. So instead of having 100 ROIs, perhaps you group them into 20 like larger ROIs, each one containing 5 sub ROIs within it. So it's going to perform an analysis for every individual group that you define. And again, for every other ROI that is not included in any group, those are going to be still included into the analysis. So you're going to see the results for the individual ROIs that are not in a group, and then the analysis for the individual groups that you have defined, and the correction is going to be performed across whatever remaining number of analyses have been performed. So typically that would be the total number of groups that you enter. plus any additional remaining ROI if that was not included into a group.
Okay, so this
Does that make
really
sense?
doesn't make sense then, because this is all of those ROIs that we looked at before. I just put them into one group.
Right. So this is like a big omnibus test, and you are asking whether across all of the ROIs in the just average across all of the regions, do I find a significant effect?
Right, and nothing's corrected because it's one ROI and it's not significant, which doesn't make sense.
Well, it's unexpected
Maybe.
because a speech
Unexpected, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
But
and the variability seems huge also because you have, how many subjects do you have?
17.
So that should be enough to lower the variability to a more manageable.
Yeah, 17. All right, well, let me,
So yeah, please, if you don't mind, try running the analysis first without the motion covered for two reasons. One, so that we see all of the messages in the second level analysis, just in case there is anything funky in there. And second, just to see whether the motion control is the thing. But before running it, let me upload the fix so that you can actually run it. Just 1 second.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'll create the file.
I just have a window here for uploading stuff. Yeah, here it is. And FL.
So it's a little mean effect.
Okay, you can try now. Give it a try and let me know how that goes.
Yeah.
These are the subject-specific ROIs.
Yeah. So that's like the issue is like trying to figure out if there's,
And these are the lumped ones, so they're bigger than what we might normally look at. So like PSTG isn't just the PSTG that we have in our full parcellation.
That's me.
Sorry about this.
Yeah, that's me. Hold on.
PTO.
Maybe I called it something else.
What maybe is it just so big that we're getting
PSD.
We're getting kind of a washout of the areas that are active during speech.
I see.
Can you, would looking at, instead of doing like the single subject, just looking at the group ROI or like the template ROIs?
And this should be, that would be a good just
to make sure
sanity check, because that should be almost the same exact thing here.
Yeah.
Because these are not corrected.
Right.
At all.
Sorry, say that again.
So instead of using the single subject, so trying it without the single subject, just using the template ROIs and seeing if you're getting the same kind of results, because then it could be a problem with the single subject or the way that the parcellation or something.
Okay.
But if there does show kind of normal looking results when you're using the template ROIs, that'll give you a sanity check that'd be like, okay, this is approximately working. And it should be approximately the same, hopefully better when you use individual subjects.
So this is an error that I'm getting because the subject doesn't have that.
It hasn't been analyzed yet. Or something.
Yeah, that's the one that we can't find. I had just taken it, I had put it back in because I was using this file for not single subject.
Right.
It's the single subject ROIs, recon is no good. So let me try that again. I took it out. Oh.
You took out the ACE 19. Oh no, 17. Right.
I took out
So
17. I can make motion.
Is there any? No, that I mean, one single missing value should be enough. So that's weird. Check.
I think.
No. Could you move it up for a second just to see?
Yeah.
The columns, column names.
Sorry,
so
move this
two things that just to see the first two columns are the control and
AST.
Right. Why is it looking for it? Let me just check. 118.
Okay.
Yes. So just using. So I think this would. Well, I guess you need to change they need to all be the same space.
I have the same space in the volume.
Okay, well that could, I don't know, I'm not exactly sure which volume ROI atlas to use.
Right.
So like,
that
this is just
one.
the one on the surface.
Okay.
But you would just put this ROIs, and if they're all in the same space, then that should be.
ACE, the sub ACE.
Oh, sorry.
17. Do you know if that's ACE?
9005.
That one you should probably leave out.
Yeah. It was in there when I wasn't doing the single subject,
Okay.
right? So that's why I
That
pulled
one
it back. Yeah,
seemed like the
Mm-mm.
recon was not great.
for sure. Yeah, it just wasn't finding it when we started running because it's a ASD subject. So the last example I did was control, so I didn't have this error. But yeah, no, absolutely, just leaving that.
And just as an update, for whatever reason, the subjects old. Only 8 of those subjects actually had data.
Yeah, Ricky and I were looking at it because that was like the half copy over, so I wasn't sure how much was there anyway.
So, I'll keep looking.
Yeah.
I've reached back out to MGH.
Yeah.
I think they have some of this.
Okay. I guess what if you write over the annote file, you can't like remake that from the recons?
We can recreate the labeling, but what we lost is where Bobby went in and edited some the pre-motor and SMA pre-SMA ROIs, which
because all of her edits, I don't know,
they're gone.
They're gone.
Her edits are gone, so we can easily recreate the labeling, like the automatic labeling. That's like a few seconds per brain. But then she went in and manually corrected a few, like I think 4 ROIs.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that we did that was when we did the previous study where we found a change in the connectivity between SMA and premotor cortex, which is we did that after manually making sure that those ROIs were accurate.
I guess that's what I wasn't understanding because I thought like, yes, approve. I guess I thought that I'm still getting used to the free surfer structure, but I thought that those files were in all different formats because there was all of her notes that said edits.
She edited them, but she saved them. So when those were created, they come out as like FS average. That's basically just applying the FS average template, automatically creating the labels on an individual subject surface. Then Bobby went in and manually corrected some
and
of
those
the
are all the
ROIs.
ones that are appended with edit 1, edit 2, edit 3.
No, that's a different
That's
process.
a different
So
edit.
that
Okay.
has to do with actually editing the reconstruction itself. So the processes to create the surface.
Okay.
So that's part of the segmentation of the surface, or I'm sorry, of the volume into gray and white matter structures, and then from that you derive the surface itself. Then the next step is labeling the surface.
Mm-hmm.
So the more accurate the surface, the better that initial labeling is going to be.
Oh, sorry, Alfonso. That's one's. Which one are you looking for? Because that one was incorrect.
That's the one that we are running right now, right?
The one that's no motion control. Yeah, the one you just pulled up there. The one that's in the command line.
All right, this is not
right. Because that was an old one with a wrong name in it.
Right. Let me get the one. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I have a naming scheme that's just.
So control group should be no motion something, right?
Yeah, no motion control. Yeah, that
There
one.
it is. Excellent. Thank you.
Once I know it's right, I make it better.
Okay, so I think the issue might be that it doesn't rerun it. Let me just check.
Okay. There's 2 different edits.
I'll probably fix this.
That's what I wasn't understanding.
General, if that is the solution.
We could make an official script that would sort of like lock you in on what the output would be if you did brain labeling.
Okay, that's fine.
You use SL FS average, then the annotation file that's created from that. We could right now, when you just use free surfer's commands, you can put whatever the hell you want in there. But we could have like an official script to run it where you put in as a variable the name of the annotation file, and if you use that name for the input annotation, the output annotation file that you create for the individual subject has that same name. That would be the way to avoid this.
That makes sense. So Alfonso, this is where, when we were in our emails, this is what I was getting really confused about because I thought it wasn't finding things in the text file. But what you're saying is this means within that subject, or whatever subject it is that they're looking at, there's no like data in those fields.
Right.
So
well, it could be just that the ROI definition files doesn't have, even though the label exists to define a region as, I don't know, one of those, there are no voxels that actually point to that.
Right, no voxels that point to it. Okay.
Okay, so the error before, it was just because, I'll fix that later, but it was just mainly because it was, the analysis were run including that particular subject, second level analysis, not the ROI, the second level stuff. But then when you ask to run the analysis for the ROI analysis, removing that subject, the design had already been defined by the original analysis, so I just needed to rerun the analysis. I'll change it so that every time that you run a second level .ROI, will force rerunning the analysis that it needs for that, so there is no confusion about whether I already did run it or not, because those don't take any time anyway. So it's probably worth it just to rerun it every time, or at least gives you a flag to be able to overwrite whatever exists, so that we don't run into these issues.
Mm-hmm.
What's this? Why are we getting this error? No ROI label.
Oh no, the no ROI label. I don't know. Are these ROIs fall in the same category that we were discussing? Those ROIs are things that have been grouped into a bigger ROIs and they are no longer relevant, or they are?
No, those should be the ones that are there.
Yeah, remember this? I thought that this was the issue that I was having where we had solved. See, this is where I was still confused, and I think this is where it's good that we can look at it together, because this list that I'm seeing here that I assumed is what it was looking at from a template,
right,
is not exactly the same as the template I'm telling it to use.
Well, it could be, is it a subset of that, or is it just different?
I thought there was things that were different, like, for example, like this is not in there, but it is in the one that I did. But I thought that's when then you had said maybe it's because there's no voxel information for those subjects. So that's how I then thought it was, but now I'm just not sure.
Okay, so the way these messages are structured is it tells you this ROI label match. Sorry, let me see. So it tells you that it cannot, perhaps the wording is not optimal. Sorry about that. So it says that it cannot find this particular region in this list of regions that are, and it gives you the list of all of the regions that it has available for you to define.
In the brain.
In whatever ROI parcellation you have actually used for that particular ROI level analysis.
Okay.
So if we are using this, so basically whatever ROI labels are defined within here, basically, whatever you're specifying there. And this is the list of ROI labels that are found in there, and that have at least one voxel marked for that particular subject. So everything that you see from here to the right are all of the actual labels that have at least one voxel in, I don't know, in that particular subject for that particular. And what it tells you is that it cannot find this name in this list of names, basically. This is the one that you are asking to find, and it doesn't find it. And it could be for several reasons. It could be because the actual label doesn't exist, or it could be because the label exists, but there are no voxels associated with it.
So this is just for one subject?
Right, or it could also be because it finds missing values for all of those. Remember that we are doing masking to remove non-brain areas. So if there is a big issue with co-registration where you are trying to find voxels in an area that is just totally outside of the brain because the ROI is defined, like, I don't know, it's not properly aligned, you would also get this type of errors because it's telling you that there are no actual voxels with any ball signal data in there for those particular regions.
So one of the things that occurs to me is that we had Ricky changed the name of the annotation file from SL Park BG to SL FS average lump BG plus aseg. So, or not the annotation file, but the file for the labeled volumes.
But I didn't think I was using those.
Okay.
Maybe I could, let me pull up my.
So we are using these ones, but
yeah,
I don't know.
can I pull up?
Okay, then that.
Let me just pull up what I imported also, just to make sure.
Right, but those names are basically whatever name you gave it during the import step is where you define those regions that you are going to be calling SL Park. Where do they come from, basically?
Yeah, so that's the main one.
Yeah, exactly.
Park, yeah.
Exactly. So here is where you are saying, yeah, exactly. So you are saying this particular file.
One thing it looks like is it's looking for stuff that has a format left dash something something. If I just, can you just go to the right so that we can follow that the top line of that
Yeah, so this is just one
Going to,
subject
right, so
though,
just
so
keep
every other
going.
subject has.
So, oh no, is
Yeah, it's all there. The nomenclature is right because when it was incorrect, I got an error for every single subject, and I could see that it was incorrect.
And right now you're just finding it for one
Subject
subject.
9.
So does
So
it
I
say
don't-
subject?
Subject 9.
Okay.
So I don't think
that's
this is
one
the reason.
subject.
Like, this is something about this subject, but I think that I highly doubt that this one subject is changing everything, right? Because that
Okay.
means that essentially there's 16 subjects that are
right.
right.
And-
So this is something I'll need to figure out, but
I see. So all of these messages are for the same
it's
subject.
just one subject.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, so that wouldn't be that big of an issue then.
However, when we were first looking at this, the results, we were getting results on that plot was popping up
Mhm.
with all the regions.
Mhm.
When we knew for sure that the regions that you were defining, right, we knew that those didn't match some of the ROIs that were actually in the label volume color table. You still get something that looks like this, where it looks
Right,
like
and the-
really nothing with.
Yeah, and this variability is totally huge. I mean, this is the effect size, so something lower than 1 is perfectly normal for average, but this like huge variability. I mean, this is 95% confidence. I don't know. It would be worth looking at the data a little bit closer to figure out why that is. So can I do that for a second? Just load
Yeah,
that data.
absolutely.
Okay, so one thing that this creates is a
If the
folder.
labels didn't match, it didn't come up.
Didn't
It
come
didn't
up.
come up. Only anything that matches comes up. When the labels
And it
were
was just turned out that the stuff that matched was not
They're
speechy,
yeah.
so it was all over the place.
Yeah. because I wasn't doing a full, I wasn't labeling certain things. I was doing a full, I was just letting it run with everything. So
we could, if this remains a mystery, I think Saul's suggestion would be an interesting, just sort of sanity check in that if you, even with all, like, even if something doesn't pass, it should still pass. If you use all the ROIs, you don't define any specific target ones, right? And that's how it works, right? If you don't give it any labels, like ROI underscore labels, list them, it actually will look at all the ROIs in the template. So that removes the issue of matching ROIs and the labels to what.
But that, I don't think that's an issue.
That's not an issue. The other thing is just something in this subject specific pipeline that we're kind of debugging. If we just use the template, it seems like that's worked, right?
So Alfonso, what is this?
So we have 27 subjects in here and 13 ROIs, and I'm just plotting the actual data that is entered. And what I'm seeing, like this, I mean, the variability is coming from this like ridiculously large. These are non-reasonable numbers for effect sizes for a speech minus baseline. There's nothing like 15% of ball signal change. I mean, this percent signal change typically units when you're looking at a speech minus baseline effects. And so this range of numbers are totally heard of. So there is something weird with that. And so that could be for several reasons. So let's figure out first which subject is this one, 19, and then we can go from there. Params, SPM, let me see. SPM, XY. It was 19, I said, I forgot. 19. Okay, so this is subject. Oh, come on, that is not very clear. Do I have that information in some other place? I think I do. Let's see. Oh, come on. Okay, so subjects. This is what I need.
19, yeah.
So ACE 24. Okay, so now let's go to ACE 24 and figure that out. I think I can do, how is it called? Open ACE 24.
It might be sub dash ACE 24.
Hey, sorry?
I'm just wondering if you have to do sub dash ACE 24, but.
think now it uses
cool.
the whole normal syntax. The sub is just for the actual file names and everything because it follows the bits convention. But for the syntax, we are just using the root portion of the name. Okay, so let me look at this data should be co-registered into the same space. Let's see, this is structural, this is functional. Well, that's fine. It's a weird space to be, but looks fine still. And these are the ROIs, and the ROIs are these ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let me check how those look with respect to the functional.
We're recording this. This is like really helpful to see the debugging. So
right. I mean, I'm just trying to display what I want to do.
Great.
Yeah, sorry, but I'm not telling you what I'm doing. What I wanted to do is look at the ROIs and look them in compared to the functional and the structural data to see whether they are actually in the same space or we have some problem with that. And for that, I just opened the project for that individual subject, and I'm gonna see if I can display ROI functional co-registration. That sounds reasonable. Oh, come on. I don't have the functional.
looks like it dropped an S somewhere.
Right.
It should be.
Right, it's trying to, yeah, that's fine.
Like removing smoothing with an S, but it's not smoothing, it's a sub.
Let me see if I can do it this other way. Let me see if I can do that. No, still. Right, yeah, right. The ROI, this is because the con-specific things are not all that robust, and they think that the S at the beginning of the name is a smoothing thing, so it's trying to remove that. I think I can do that still here, probably. Let me see. I'm trying to see a workaround that allows me to select which particular functional data. By default, those plots that I'm selecting are going to try to show you the unsmooth data, the functional data, together with the ROIs. But by getting the unsmooth data, it's assuming that it has to remove whatever it has at the beginning, and that's why it's complaining. But I think I can just create a plot that does the same thing without, and it will actually ask me which functional data do I want to use, so it won't run into that issue. So let me see. I want to look at the registration between an ROI and the functional data. So this one, I think, sorry, this one, functional data and an outline. And let me see, which ROI do I want to show? I think it's this one, right? Yeah, not for all subjects. Yeah, well, all subjects, but I only have one subject. Oh, come on, it didn't ask me. Okay, the same error. Should have asked. It's still doing the same thing. I was pretty sure that this was asking, am I missing the place? Let's see, functional data. No. Right, perhaps I can, let me see. No, I don't have a reasonable workaround. Sorry about this. Let me check then something simpler first, at least. Let me check whether the functional and the structural are all fine, and then I'll check manually the ROIs. And I'll fix this so the con doesn't complain about that. Because it's a little lame. Okay, so display functional anatomical co-registration with SPM is fine.
So I said, I was like, ACE is like the perfect thing for this. Because it's like, do you have a problem? Because ACE will have it.
Okay, that looks fine.
New one.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah. What could happen?
Because we really should run this again, and we will run it again. We can do it now with the SLFS average.
Okay, so this is a reasonable correlation between functional and structural. So this, so as a workaround, I can just display the correlation with the structural because the structural and the functional seem to be in the same space. So that is going to avoid this issue and just show the correlation with the structural of my. Oh, sorry, not right. I want to select this ROI and viewer with structural overlay, and that shouldn't run into this issue. Right, so I first check that the functional and the structural seem reasonably in the same space. Now I'm going to look at whether that also looks in reasonably the same space. Let me just check with the role of this coloring thing. overlay image. So I have only the contour and remove any smoothing or anything, just to avoid potential issues. Okay. So that looks fine. Let me check. So yes, I mean, so the functional data seems to be, sorry, the ROI data seems to be in the same space as the functional data. So why? Sorry, with the structural data, but the structural data also seem to be reasonably well correlated to the functional. That's what I was looking here, basically, to look at the.
Oh, that's a good point. All right, because we had decided that in the pipeline we didn't need to co-register. Oh, no. You had said that even though we don't have the structural and functional co-registration explicitly in the pipeline, that's happening with.
No, it is explicitly in the pipeline. There is if you remember, let me see if I have it wrong. Can you pull the preprocessing configuration file? There is a step that says functional co-registration, and even it doesn't actually mention the structural, but that co-registration is actually with the structural. It's not with anything else.
Oh, right, of course.
The functional co-register affine is actually co-registering the functional to the structural, so that's why both should be in the same space. But I mean, that can have an error, so it's reasonable to double check. But this is the, let me see, just axial.
So are we looking at the functionals of a?
Right, this is not the which ROI I'm looking here. This doesn't look the ROI that. Oh no, yeah, I'm looking at I'm looking at the functional and the structural, right? So I'm just looking at the functional data, and here a rough outline of the structural data. So the yellow lines are roughly the boundaries of intensity values based on the structural data, and the image that you see behind is the actual functional data. So I'm just checking whether there is anything weird with functional, but everything seems fine to the degree that this looks all reasonable. Okay, so this means basically that the functional and the structural are reasonably co-registered. And then the other image that we had in here was the one that showed, let me see, was this one? No. No, sorry, what was the other? Perhaps I closed it. The other image that we had was this one that we were displaying this particular ROI, which is
right on the structural. Yeah.
Right on the structural, just to see where it had been, there was anything weird with that, but there was nothing. So that doesn't explain why we're seeing weird data. Let's look at the actual functional data just to see whether there is anything weird with that functional data. We have 3 sessions. Let's see. Session 1, session 3.
Jason, I hadn't run SLFS average on the volume because I wasn't sure where the volume base.
That looks fine. Let's look at the covariates just to figure out whether we have excessive motion or something like that. We don't have the covariates.
And generate that file.
Just from the SLF average.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Right, they should import.
That's probably a good thing to do.
New emphasis on choosing the.
Right, I haven't defined this. That's fine.
Responsibly.
Just keep pending.
Yeah. I think what Ricky did was he copied directly from the SEC drive, so it was the exact same nomenclature. So that's why he ended up writing over it.
Yeah, I think it was he borrowed from a script.
Oh, right, this is because I'm looking at the raw data. Sorry.
I think the point of that was just to extract the data from those files, but and add the step of recreating the.
Could you recall? Could you remind me what is the name of the preprocessing pipeline that we are using?
Free Surfer.
Free Surfer. Okay. Thank you. Because I wasn't seeing the realignment parameters, I wanted to double check. So the thing, when you say FL open and just the name of the subject, it brings the actual raw data. When you want to actually see the results of some preprocessing pipeline, you have to include the name of the pipeline. So I'm going to repeat what I just did because I was actually looking at the original data, which seemed to be rather than the fully preprocessed data. So I want to make sure that there was nothing weird with the preprocessing. Let's see, structural, functional. They seem to be still reasonably in the same space. Slice viewer with how much anatomical. Okay, I'm going to use axial. Yeah, that looks fine. Reasonably.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, this is just like the way this is cut off for this display. Yeah, yeah.
I guess it'll go away if you just overlay threshold.
Right, exactly. I'm choosing a liberal threshold. That's fine. I mean, this functional structure looks fine. So let's look at the ROIs again, and then we look at the data and the motion. Right. So ROIs. So the one was called SL, right? We gave the name.
Yeah, that's when I gave them a different name.
Excellent. That's perfectly fine. That's just to make sure that I'm looking at the same. So I can look at the.
Although.
Right, and actually I could now use the look at the.
I'm not actually sure if they were called SL. That was an older version. I
Oh,
thought
really?
they had the original. I thought that I used the SL Park VG nomenclature.
Huh, that's right.
Because that's what I was calling for the ROI. Because when I'd first done it, this was one, but this would have been.
Right, you're right. Why
yeah, no, I don't think this is
that?
it.
Huh. But it would have complained that it cannot find in a different ROI name. Oh no, because you are not using the ROI name, right? You are using explicitly the names, right? In the ROI file configuration file, you are pointing to the raw actual file names rather than using the whatever name you used.
Right, but that name, when I had imported it originally, when I was trying to figure out what to do, I'd imported it with this name, and that's what it called the ROI file.
Ah,
so
no, that might
I'm surprised that this is. Can we look in that folder? Can we look in the scanner folder or whatever the ROI folder? Because that's surprising to me that that's coming up.
Right. I mean, it could be that this particular subject. Let me just quickly do some quick check for a different subject. What 23 is a valid subject?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see if it has a different ROI name for that. No, it's still SL, all of those. So that means that the import has gone through using a different configuration files for all of these Ys. Let me see. Oh, no, it means that, oh, right. No, but that is fine. It's not using this. Right. I mean, okay. So to avoid having, when you import a new ROI, the new ROI goes into the kind of like the raw project for that particular subject.
Mm-hmm.
When you then preprocess some data, it imports, it creates like a copy of whatever data you have for that subject. And from that copy, it preprocesses that copy and it works on that. And that copy is going to have basically all of the ROI names from the time that the first time you run the preprocessing steps.
Okay.
But to avoid this being an issue, when you create a new ROI, if the second level analysis relies on this like preprocessing copy of the ROI files, then that means that whenever you make a change to the ROI files and you re-import it, you will also have to run preprocessing, just so that that copy of the ROI that was in the raw file is also gets copied to the preprocessed folders, basically. And to avoid that from happening, because running preprocessing just for new ROIs doesn't make any sense, when you run second level analysis, it actually uses the ROIs that are defined in the raw data, wherever it doesn't. Because the processing never changes the ROIs, it's always going to use the ROIs defined in the raw data. So that means that whatever you have here in this particular ROI definitions, the FL pipeline is not going to use, because it assumes that it might be older than the ones that you have in the other file that we just saw in the raw data. So that's fine that this has a different name. That shouldn't be affecting anything, as long as the ones that we are using in. So when you are pointing to the original files, you are pointing to the same files that we were looking at in, let me see, here. What is the other com window? Well, I can just, that one. Oh, no, not that one. I wanted to look at the actual raw data.
Mm-hmm.
So this one. Okay, so these ROIs, let me see, these ROI files are the same that you are entering from this, the whole folder is seen here. I just want to check whether these are, I don't remember the folder names that you use, but are those basically the same as what you enter into the configuration file?
Yes.
Okay, so
not from the, I just got linked, I mean, it's the same thing. I linked to the project NB version of this.
Right.
But yes.
I thought it should be the same thing. Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, within
The raw,
from this point on, basically.
Yes.
So you're going to ace sub something ROI. You are not going to ace and then let's say free surfer and then sub something.
Yeah, nope, just that. Before I go into any levels, yeah.
Okay, so then it's using exactly these files. The only, let me see, how can I quickly check? Well, I could quickly check whether that is still in the same space. Let's do that. So this loads the data that has been preprocessed, but it has the wrong ROI. So I'm just manually going to point to the correct one, just so that I can plot it for a second. Let me see. So this is the wrong folder, right? So this is looking within derivatives, free surfer, sub something. This is not the one that we want. So we want that subject 24, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then ROIs. All of them are the same, right? This is just okay.
Yeah,
right,
this is definitely
empty,
correct. The old one might have been in a different space, so but this is what I'm using in the config file.
Okay, so that should be fine now, even though it has still this name. And now let me check whether that is still in the same space as the preprocessed data. So I'm going to use, I think it should work now with functional data because this has been imported with the proper naming convention. Yeah. Okay, so axial without all of those colors, only the outlines. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it looks perfectly fine. It has this anterior thing with the, but that is totally normal. And yeah, so this is in the same space. There is no problem with the correlation as far as I can tell from between the ROI definition file and the functional data. So let's look at the actual functional data to see why we are getting those weird numbers. Let's see. Functional data looks fine, at least in terms of the average. That looks fine. The amount of motion, let's see. For different sessions looks fine. And the scrubbing, well, we are removing quite a lot from session 3. Wow, quite a lot from, wow, that's ridiculous. Okay, so that might be why we are having a problem with this subject, because we are removing almost everything for this subject in terms of motion, right?
The other thing that I had done in previous pre-processing pipelines that I didn't do at this one is made a much more liberal art threshold. Would that be something I should do here as well for this pipeline?
Right. I mean, the problem is in this subject, if there was at least one session that has some data, I would use that for estimating. But probably what is happening is that this subject just has too much motion in all of the sessions. Let's actually look at the amount of motion. Look, I think I can do it.
Yeah, because we had that issue with other pipelines. I just wasn't sure if using this free server pipeline, it would be okay to make the art thresholds that liberal. Right.
I should output we don't have an easy way to check the number of outlier points for every subject, right? We don't have a way to import that information into our participants CSV file or something like that. It would be handy to have that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we have that information basically stored in here. For every individual subject, there are all of these variables that tell you how many valid scans you have across the entire session. So you only have 17 scans and valid. Everything else has been removed for this subject, and that's why you probably cannot estimate any effects.
Across all 3 runs.
Across all 3 runs, and the invalid scans are the other 70 something, and the max motion is, wow, it's 8 millimeters. Okay, so 8.5 millimeters is a lot of max motion. And the mean motion is 1.3, which is also relatively very high. Let's actually look at this. You can create a plot for the. Let me see if we have all of those plots. Nice. So let's look at the
size for speech by space.
Yeah.
Something went wrong there.
Right. So this is the subject, and this is the problem basically, that all of these things that are marked here in the bottom are the things that are outliers. So pretty much everything is outlier except a few points here and there. And this is the also make this bigger. Sorry. This is the ball global signal change measure from scan to scan, and this is the actual subject motion from scan to scan, and the units, you see, they are huge. This is 8 millimeters, so there are too many points that are having too much scan-to-scan motion. You can just browse through it to see.
So, big picture then, for a data set like this, where we know there's a lot of motion, we know we're going to have to do a lot of things, is it not a good idea to try to do these subject-specific things? Should I just generally stay in the volume, not try to get down to these smaller areas, because I know things are less exact?
No, this is going to happen independent of ROI or subject-specific or not, because this is a problem with the first-level estimation, right? When you
but we figured out our pipeline. We have figured out in the volume a decent pipeline where we get contrast that makes sense in speech minus volume. I mean,
right, but
baseline.
That shouldn't be the case here, because this has way too much motion for that to be the case. So either we are using a different sort of first level analysis, or we are using different thresholding options for like art and things like that.
It definitely has different art thresholds, because I used directly what Jason sent me, so I didn't update that. So maybe I should run it with those other art thresholds.
Right. The big picture is that whatever like procedure we follow for the voxel level analysis to determine which was a reasonable, how to salvage as much of the data as possible and use thresholds that are reasonable, you should use the same thing for ROI level analysis, and that is not happening in this case. When you can actually probably look at, so the contrast estimability is ridiculously low, and there is no, these all are warnings that are telling you that you are not going to be able to estimate anything meaningful from this particular subject at the first level analysis. So this is a problem with the first level analysis, because you are introducing into the design metrics. Let me show you the design metrics, how it looks. So because we are introducing into the design metrics all of the motions, let me see if I can make it bigger a little bit. It's just design metrics, it's fine. So this is the three runs. This is the design metrics. These are the things that we are interested in, and these are the things that we are removing. These are outlier scans, everything that has a mark on outlier is marked in here. So basically, when you are trying to estimate these effects of the things that you care about, the speech minus baseline, because they are not going to have enough degrees of freedom to be able to estimate those, and they are going to just give you noise. And if you enter that, and that is going to be for the first level analysis, so that is at the voxel level. Whether you group them by ROIs or use them in second level analysis, doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything. There's still going to be a problem with the estimation of the speech responses for this type of subjects. And it also doesn't matter which preprocessing pipeline you use. If you are using this type of thresholds for M&I data at the voxel level, you would still run into the same issue. So
okay, so then for the free surfer pipeline, if I go back and I add the more liberal art thresholds, do I keep the smoothing the same, or should I also move that up to the 2 levels of smoothing?
Right. No, that's fine. Smoothing is probably fine, because we are going to use ROI levels aggregation, and the ROI aggregation is typically enough to increase signal to noise ratio. So,
so it's just the liberal art threshold, which was a big issue before. So that does.
Right. And do you recall which values we use for the voxel level analysis for this, for the art thresholding? Okay, so just use the same parameters then for the first level analysis for this pipeline, basically, and that should give you more reasonable subject-specific data for this. The ROI correlation seems to be fine, so I don't think that is an issue. I think the issue is mostly this, and probably the other subjects. When I was plotting this, I think it was here in figure 4. But I don't know.
Is there a way to do this now that it's been pre-processed, or do I have to pre-process it? Like, with the art threshold, is there a way to do that sort of after it's been pre-processed, or do I need to redo it?
That's a good point. There is, but it's going to be tedious.
I can just redo it. That's no big deal. I can let it run. I'm just curious if there was another way.
Right. I mean, there is a way to rerun it from this window, but this window is only available separately for every subject, so you will have to do it separately for every subject. So
that's no. It's no big deal to rerun it. I just was curious.
Alfonso, can you send around the command you used to generate that ROI plot that you were just showing? Because that would be really handy, I think.
You mean this? Let me see, the figure 4 thing.
Just looking at.
Right. So what I did was cd first to the folder where the second level analysis has been run, and within there you will see that there is a file called rex something. If you load that rex file, and then the data is going to be within a variable that is called params ROI data. And this data is going to be number of subjects by number of regions. So if we look at data that's going to have 27 subjects and 13 regions, that is the data that is being then entered into second level analysis to determine, I don't know, what is the average effect that you have across all subjects or within a group, or whether there are group differences or anything like that. So this is kind of like the raw data for every individual subject, for every region. What is the effect size that you are measuring? In this case, the effect size is speech minus baseline. And then I just plotted it just without any fancy thing, just using plot for that to plot the data. Sorry. And it looks like that. Basically, these axes are these subjects, and all of the different lines is one per region. So this is just to see whether I see anything.
That's great.
Outlier. Right.
You might want to just see what happens when you run without that subject.
Yeah, I mean, I have a degrees of freedom issue for many of these. So if I'm gonna rerun it with more liberal, that makes sense. I didn't do that. I think it makes sense to recheck that subject after I have more liberal, because
And this shows you we've gone through like an exhaustive set of QA checks for us to look at. And this is one nice thing about looking at the ROI analyses is that it does give you a little snapshot of like what exactly is the response that we're seeing in a region.
yeah, it's nice.
Right, so this image also might be helpful. I mean, this is just image scale of the same data. This is subjects by region. So if you see things that look like this, like outliers and rows, then it's individual subjects that seem to have some problems in the data. If you see outliers in columns, then you see individual regions that might have some problem, and that might be an issue with correlation or the definition of the region within a subject.
Oh, nice.
I don't know. So
yeah,
just
no, that's really helpful.
Identify what is it might be causing the issue, and this is all. I mean, the flag that should tell you that there is something weird with the data was probably the very big, the very large standard deviation type of plots. When you are looking at the ROI level results, if you see those huge error bars, that means that there is something in the data. Either there are outliers that are causing this variability to be huge, or the data itself has huge variability, which is still not all that reasonable. So that's why we went and look in more detail to look at that data to figure out what was causing that huge variability. And it seemed to be like these few subjects which are causing that huge variability, and then we tried to figure out why that was the case. And then in this case, it was probably because we don't have enough degrees of freedom because these subjects moved a lot. So I don't know. In other cases, might be different, the cause of the variability, but I don't know. That's kind of like a reasonable pipeline to follow when you have some.
Oh, that's great.
When we looked at these plots, even after the high art threshold, when you look at the plots for each subject, you're typically not paying a whole lot of attention to the scale.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that there are some here that are very high in the positive direction may have made it seem like more reasonable. Given
So when I was plotting individual subject contrasts, I put them all on the same
they
scale.
were on the same
I did put them on the same scale for this reason, because I had such a difference. And then some of them look okay, and some of them do, but I did do that. So I did have a large variability. And I think part of it was degrees of freedom, even when I have the more liberal art threshold. But as a whole, even though I had those things, I did have consistent speech network activation on average. It did fit with what I saw. So that was at least a sanity check.
It would be good. It would be interesting to look at this one in the just the voxel wise.
Absolutely.
Just for us to, going forward, because what we should see here for some key speech regions, it's highly negative. And I mean, once you apply the more liberal art threshold, that would change, but or could change, but it's still, I would look at all these to see if that's something that we should just done.
Well, I'd have to do that after I run the ROI analysis of volume. Yeah, that's great. I can make the FS average volume ROI to use. Right? I have to, because I don't have ROI analysis right now in the volume.
What I'm saying is, what would be interesting to do as a way for us, because this went through, it would be interesting to look at, if you look at just the volume-based analysis, QA of this subject.
Like not the ROI.
Not the ROI, just volume-based voxel-wise analysis, or vertex-wise analysis to see what speech minus baseline looks like when you just plot it on the surface.
Right, and we can actually do that. I mean, that should have been generated here, right? So we should have the QA plot. I think it was, let's say, ACE24, and then free surfer pipeline and first level analysis. What was the name of the first level analysis? Sorry.
Oh, good question. It was speech update. Oh, here, I can type it.
Thank you. Okay, so let's see. So that would bring these basically, and the things that you have here are all, well, kind of like the same things that we look at. The artifacts here tells you that you have a lot of motion, and then if you look at the actual first level model, you have all of these plots that have been created as well, where you have the design, the results. This is the image that you are looking for, and well, yeah, I mean that's going to look weird because we don't have any. The correlation of the subjects is in the raw, the actual structural data is in the raw orientation that it has, which was kind of like looking up. And so that looks a bit weird, right? I mean, but this is again, this is the speech minus, it should be the speech minus baseline.
The activation is wonky.
Right, but this should be the speech minus baseline. If we are not seeing any right.
This fits with what we're seeing in the plots. It's mostly negative.
Right, and in the wrong places.
Positive, it's in the wrong, it's not. So, and when we look at the more liberal threshold, so that's really positive, motion related, presumably.
Right, exactly. I mean, this is the type of plots that we use to determine whether this looks like reasonable speech minus baseline. So that would also give us a hint that there's something weird with this, at least at the level of the first level. And then
here, let me try something.
So when we use the more liberal threshold, presumably we looked at that one, so that looks like it's probably pretty good. But you know, this is when we should look back and say, okay, what is pretty good. But I do like the idea of just getting the ROI analysis done, even if you were never going to use it, only so that you have this extra window into seeing what these values are.
Oh, I don't realize what you're doing.
okay, so that looks much more reasonable than in terms of number of outliers. I don't know these.
Yeah, this is the volume.
Yeah.
One with liberal R threshold.
Right, and if you look at the sign matrix, you will see that let me see, in here, the sign matrix, it doesn't have all of those columns. That it has a few columns marking the most severe outliers, but it doesn't have all of those, like basically all. So this looks much more reasonable and much more, I guess, liberal in this case.
Yeah.
And then that, let's see, that probably see where we find we can change the threshold here, but. Okay. Well, so at least a little bit more speech minus baseline what we would expect. Right. Okay. So this looks much more reasonable, right? So probably, so I would say use whatever settings you use in this analysis for the free surfer stuff, for the free surfer pipeline.
Great. That makes sense. I'll take a look at that. Awesome. Thank you.
No problem. And do you have any of you as well? Any questions about would you know how to look at these type of issues in your data, like in more detail, how to call these plots or something? Or was it something that we did that was a little bit too fast, and would you like me to repeat?
I know, I think this was good, and we're recording it, which is great. So we can go back and follow the steps. It's always really helpful.
No problem.
I said anything regrettable.
I remember watching back when I'm like, oh, that was a terrible joke I made. Can I edit that?
Actually, that'd be totally comfortable. The option of giving everybody editability, editing pass.
Just have wide part or large parts of the video that are redacted.
Yeah, right.
Right. Do we have the ability to do that, to crop certain segments of the conversation?
Add scrubbing to the FLQA.
Yeah, and also we need an index to the kind of like really interesting portions of the talk, because they end up being like 1 hour and you have to go through, I don't know, perhaps in minute 37 something interesting happened.
We did talk about like having a 2-tier two-tiered, like a way to name them so that it's like, there's a, here's just sort of random usings on the FL pipeline, and here's actually new useful information.
I do have, I'm open to input in the names because Bobby usually asks me, and I was like, oh, well, like single subject ROI analysis, but it ends that, there end up being 7 videos called second level ROI analysis or such. So at least that narrows it down. But it's not just FL1, FL2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we were trying to add the topic, right?
Yeah.
But we could add something like tutorial. This is where there was a prepared tutorial that we went through. Problem solving, like ROI,
That's kind of
problem solving. That's how it is.
Okay. I guess we can stop. Just start processing.
Things that we've been meaning to cover, and I don't know if it would be worth like saying specifically on X date we will actually cover them. So like the things that come to mind are Jason, your ROI stuff.
Yeah, that's sort of, it's a kind of nebulous thing.
Yeah.
The thing that's holding up the talking in here, maybe I should not do that, is that I want to have a bunch of stuff prepared.
Yeah.
And it just keeps getting
But
put
I
on
think
but
like
maybe just talking through,
what you have,
what we
and
have so
like
far.
I was feeling it's in a better shape than you think, or at least it's something. And a few of us have been kind of using documentation a bit, so we might as well
Okay.
talk about it.
It's still new to us. Like even if you are the only one who knows like what the ideal would be,
Yeah.
any information is great.
Sure, and I can break down like just what the files are. So I can go
Right.
through, we already have something that goes through the free server bit of this that didn't seem completely relevant because you guys don't really need to worry about the recon part of it, but by discussing it, at least you'll know kind of what we're talking about, like this editing. There's editing to go, the editing process that's to make sure the surface itself that you're generating is as accurate as possible, because that's really that's will determine the max quality of any of the ROIs that you use later. And that's something that we Bobby essentially takes care of us with me overseeing. And then you have the next step, which is applying the labels, and we have the different types of labels, and then you can or cannot, you can choose to do some edits on that. And so ultimately, when these things come out, a lot of the ROIs are pretty accurate, especially if you in the lumped version of what we do, because it's on more global major gyrus level. So the way FreeSurfer works is it's trying to look at the surface curvature. So where you have the biggest curvature changes are at major sulcide. So it can then map what it thinks are like what's the central sulcus to the template. So it does a much better job of matching the template for those. So if you have ROIs that are on that major gyrus, so like inferior frontal gyrus, is much more accurate on a whole than it is if you try to divide it up into pars opercularis or pars triangularis. And for most purposes, maybe you don't need to do that, but because we're looking at speech data, it's pretty important that we do that in some way. And so that actually is why we have both the more fine-grained speech lab parcellation and then the much less fine-grained lumped. One of the motivators was that for the kids study and to stutter with the Michigan group, we know that they're collecting longitudinal data. They're getting something, they have something like 80 to 100 kids at different time points, and there's no way that someone's going to go in there and manually edit them. So when we looked at what's the variability of the parcellation units, and the ones that popped up to be the most variable. So where FreeSurfer does the least accurate job, we're on those inferior frontal ROIs that are so important. So we said, well, let's not divvy them up. We'll just try to keep them. We still have an anterior of a triangularis and a porcularis. So trying to mimic or trying to get BA 44 and 45, but not divvying them up more like we want for some purposes. So the reason when we did the original study looking at adults with autism, that was still on a pretty big scale. I can't remember what the numbers were, but it was still pretty big scale. But because we were really focused in, we thought, well, if you have a cohort that's just not actually producing, there's just not speech output. Maybe it's part of this like motivation and go signal connections that we looked specifically at SMA and pre-SMA, and we wanted them to be as accurate as possible. So we thought it was worth the time for Bobby to go in and edit those, because we could do those borders pretty quickly. And that's why we did it again with the kids in this case. So you have those options. So explaining that will probably be helpful. You can, and then coming up with, maybe we can consider kind of a workshop where I say, what would you say is the best naming? What do we want to do here for the naming conventions and things like that? Because in the past, it's always been very idiosyncratic. It's like, well, for you, like, so Sean Ching was originally doing this stuff. He's the one that first really started applying the speech lab labels. Our more recent version of them in publications, and he had something like SL Park 17. I think that's because there were 17 subjects in the classifier, but I'm not 100% sure of that. There's an SL Park 12. And he came up with Slay Park 572 CTAB. I think that's because there are 572 labels in it, but I'm not 100% sure of that either.
They sound like speaker models.
Yeah, right.
They do. So I'm trying to pull that bit out so that we have. So here's this. One of the things that we could do is, so like the BG was meant to show that somebody actually went in there and fixed it. And at that time I was using SLA Park and SL, and switch it to SL Park. So it's not just automatic, SL Park BG. That was where that came from. And BG is because when I first met Bobby, she was Bobby Glode instead of Bobby Holland. And I just had it in my head. It was like around the time when she had just gotten here, so I put BG. So that's confusing too. So, but the FS average now is meant to indicate that it's the template that you're using to do the labeling is FS average, because it's not necessarily the case. So for those kids study, the kids who stutter, we came up with we generated our own template that was from a range of the kids, within the age range of the kids, and tested what was the different sets of subjects in there to see what would produce automatic labels that were the closest to a manually edited gold standard. So that's why so that's why I wanted to have that a way of differentiating it, what the actual template was. And now the way we do this, we do the labeling, we do it sort of the easiest way. So we just take the labels from the template and apply them to the individual brains. And so what you should get if you do the template-based approach to ROI analysis and the subject space approach, if you were to just use a SLFS average, should be the same, right? So that would be the argument, right? When we had that discussion here, is it the same? It seemed like it would be the same, but that might be a good insanity check for us to do to make sure that they're the same. So the idea would be if you just say, we're just going to have everything in the template space, apply these individual subjects, should be the same as if you do it in the individual subject space and use the labels from the template.
Okay, but if I wanted to just use the one that we already have, the SLFS average, I'd have to be doing service analysis.
if you want, my understanding of the way the FL pipeline is set up now, that if you wanted to use, yes, if you wanted to use that, you just assign a template as an input that you would want, that it would have to be surface-based analysis.
Okay, which I'm not sure if I.
Would applying the ASEG to the FS average template, or the APARC to ASEG, would that generate reasonable volume?
I think no. I think so. The way that this was made, it was that template is actually literally the average of a bunch of subjects. So you have the template you're looking at, the 305. So the FS average is the MNI 305 volume. You look at that, it's very fuzzy because it's just literally the co-register, a bunch of they try to co-register everything as best possible. Then you look at the average, it's fuzzy, noisy. The surfaces, the FS average surface is also the average of all the surfaces from those individual templates. So when you look at that surface, it doesn't look like an actual brain volume, because what the averaging effectively does is create giant sulci. So it's one thing that's nice is you can find what are the most robust sulci in the brain. You can see them because they pop up in that average.
Mm-hmm.
But when you then, if just within FreeSurfer, you load the 305, the FS average surfaces on the 305 volume, you miss a ton of cortex. So there's a lot of cortex missing. So I don't think that in itself isn't a good match. So if you're going to use those ROIs, volume ROIs, to extract data from an individual brain, even when it's been co-registered to MNI 305 space, it doesn't do a good job. If you did something like label the MNI 152, that does a much better job.
So wait, I'm confused. So what would be a good check for me to do that if it's not a good idea to change the SLFS average to the volume?
A good check for you?
Yeah.
I think so. Just going back to what I was saying before.
Yeah.
It's basically what we just did, which was what Alfonso walked us through, looking at, not for the ROI, so like as a check on the validity of the results. Is that what you're saying?
He was saying how wanted to try the same analysis using the average template rather than in single subject ROIs, just to see, because that should show approximately the same as using single subject ROIs.
Right, but that should be done on the surface, right? So get the surface data.
On the surface.
Right, so you have your surface preprocessing and you get the surface functional data, and then you apply the mask that is defined in the surface.
I don't know if that's a good idea.
Which gives you very reasonable, very similar results, basically.
But my surfaces are weird because I don't have field maps, so I just don't know if we're going down a path that's going to be more confusing, because I specifically haven't done surface level.
But yeah,
so right, but effectively you are doing the same thing here, right? Because you are using all of these ROIs that are defined on the surface, then you have the same issue here just by using ROI level analysis.
I guess
level analysis, you are not running around the problem.
No, absolutely, and that's a question I had before, but I was under the impression that these would be safer because they were looked at by a person.
Which one?
The single subject.
Single subject. So a person has looked at the recons and determined if they're reasonable, and they're reasonable for almost every brain except for there are a few that it's not. Of the ones that you have access to. There are some other ones that were really bad, but for the ones for these 005, even though the functional data looks good, we take recon quality for something. There's something about something in that T1 over, and we have a couple of different examples of it. For some reason, it just did not work out. Somebody looked those over and found that those look pretty good, and so long as the co-registration looks pretty good, then those are fine for using So when we talk about we talked about not doing surface-based analysis because we were worried about motion, and we were worried about we also, it seems like we're gonna have to give up on the idea of doing the unwarping.
Yes. We can do I am doing unwarping even in the volume, but not using field
so
maps.
like the whatever free surface unwarping is, but not the field map. What are we going to call that if we don't call it unwarping?
Correction. I don't know.
Correction. Not the field map correction.
Yeah.
So theoretically, we thought, well, that's not. Then we probably want to dump this. Like we probably want to not do surface-based analysis. We have since then had conflicting data results relative to that theoretical assumption, right?
So the rhythm study I've been using, so I don't have field maps for half the subjects, so I haven't been using them for any of the subjects, and I've been doing surface analysis. It's been pretty reasonable.
I guess the concern was because I have so much movement, not using field maps would make that. I thought that was the question. It's not just that I didn't have field maps, but it's that because I had so much movement to do surface analysis, I would really need to have field maps. But if I didn't have a lot of movement, you're generally having an approximation that you can use during unwarping, and that it's okay. But I don't know. That's just what I thought we had talked about.
So
but that doesn't mean, which makes sense for yours, right?
Yeah. If we go back to our theoretical meetings,
right,
both of those are a factor. The movement and the lack of the field maps.
Right, because the movement is going to, like, what's it called? When you don't have that field map information, it gets like exponentially worse. The movement correction makes the distortion worse, right? Alfonso, am I off here? I thought the movement makes the I'm forgetting the actual words, but the movement makes
there is a motion by susceptibility artifact interaction, basically, and that is, I think, what we are referring to. That interaction of susceptibility artifacts with motion is going to be bigger the bigger the motion is itself. But yeah.
Okay, so then again, just to step back here, I have something with a lot of movement. We know it has a lot of movement. We can get something in the volume and sort of not really worrying about it. We have these single subject ROIs where we've looked at stuff on the surface. Is it fair for me to do that? Is it fair for me to go down this single subject pipeline? Or because this data set is, not great, I don't know, right? It has a lot of movement. Is this just a bad idea for me to even go to the single subject level, since that does involve the surface?
I don't think it's single subject or not. That's
surface, right? But surface in this particular way, right?
Because if you use surface-based analysis in itself, either with ROIs or with vertex-wise comparisons, is a concern. It's a concern. The concern that my certainty of that concern has been shaken a bit based on what we've seen from some of the other studies, but those studies don't have the motion that yours does. They just don't have the field maps, but they also don't have the motion. So I don't think there's any problem with you doing the ROI analysis that we're doing.
Okay.
What I do think is that we may want, when we looked at 17 subjects, and then 2 were just obviously so different than the rest. And when you look, they say, you have these massive motion artifacts. It may be that we just want to toss those.
Yeah.
Because it's not just that the effects are small.
Yeah, and we can go back to that because this data set is already tossing 5 people that have way too much motion. So that sort of analysis has been done and decided at a certain point. That doesn't mean that we can't go further, but there was a clear motion cutoff. So I think that that's fine. We can continue to have those conversations. I just want to make sure I understand. That makes sense. Like, is it worth going down this pipeline since I don't want to go with surface level this other way? This sort of explanation seems reasonable to sort of, with this data set. If I get things, you believe that the results that come out of it. It doesn't feel like it's just chance.
Yes.
Okay.
I can. Yeah, you're right.
You see what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Like, because I can get something, but it doesn't mean that it's reasonable.
Right. But we need to keep doing what we did today.
Of course.
We look at that and you say, okay, is biologically plausible
Right.
that you would get something that looks like this,
Yeah.
given what we know about the speech network.
Okay. That's great.
Now,
Yeah.
so we think that something's not right. And then when you look and you see, well, there's one subject that's getting negative responses that are multiples of the positive response that we're getting from the other subjects. You think, okay, well, then there's something clearly
Sure.
something's going on with this subject that's like violating some of the assumptions.
Well, but they look really different with the liberal motion in the other analysis. So I can do that again.
Okay.
As long as I just wanted to make sure it made sense to keep going, and it sounds like it does. So then I can go through and do these actual QA checks.
Right. I mean,
now that
you
we
can say, you can make an argument. Someone can argue, well, what's the value of doing the ROI analysis and not just sticking with the volume-based analysis? That, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think you can do things with the ROIs that you can't do.
Yeah. I mean, my thought was, and maybe this is not how I should be thinking about ROI analysis, but my thought was I really am only interested in the speech reason at this point, right? So that way it just takes out all of the other corrections and everything else. I'm sort of limiting what I'm looking at. So that was my...
Right. And I think for your study, based on what we have already from the adults, you can say something like, well, we're going to expect lower activity in SMA and premotor cortex.
Mhm.
We just say that going in as a legit hypothesis going in. And we just look at that and only correct for that and see if we see that. And then do the other one. So there are other things you can do. Like,
right, and that's what we had talked about in lab
and,
meeting, right? That's what we talked about in lab meeting, was doing the 2 hypothesis-driven ones, and then an overall speech network specific exploratory one. So that will be the goal, but this makes sense now. Okay, thank you. Great. So I'll just let this finish.
And the sanity check is that the stuff should pop up in the controls. We should see stronger speech, the speech activation. And if you use the SLFS average, one advantage of that, in terms of like just trying to do the sanity check part of this of speech, that we should see positive activation in lateral motor somatosensory cortex, and we should see activation in auditory cortex. The lumped ROIs you're using now in the auditory cortex are so big that even with positive activation there, you might not be seeing it. Even if you even if you control for a subject that's has some really highly variable response. So that's the flip side of lumping the ROIs.
How old are these subjects again?
They're teenagers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're adolescent to young adults, so they're not they're not babies.
Right, because we're using the
regular
template.
template.
The regular adult template, and it seems pretty. There was a study 2 years ago that said you could use that. It's appropriate to go down to, I think, 8.
Yeah, I think
years old.
the youngest is 11, but I'm pretty sure they were excluded. I think the youngest usable is 14. Okay.
As a follow-up from this, it may be useful for when Jason talks a little bit further for how we define ROIs and all of that. Perhaps it will be that the best place to do this, but it would be useful at some point perhaps to have a backup M&I space parcellation of our regions of interest. And right now we can do that just by manually doing that, projecting the regions that we have on this M&I 152 surface, but that is a little bit too specific to that particular surface. It might be, I don't know, there might be better ways to do that, but it would be good to have that type of backup label file, like ROI file in M&I space that kind of represents the same regions without going through all of the complexities of the surface level estimation and projection for every individual subject, but that it should give you something relatively similar to what we get when we do use our surface-based ROIs.
And you don't think just applying the labels in the M&I 152 volume would be sufficient?
Right. I mean, that might be a good start. I don't know if it might be worth kind of growing that a little bit, because if you just project that on the M&I 152, you're going to have a very ribbony look, and it's going to be disregarding a lot of voxels, which might be useful. I mean, if you do the M&I normalization, there's going to be some variability at the end. So it might be worth to kind of grow that as in like literally like extend it like in a binary mask and to be a little bit more inclusive. I don't know, but this would be a conversation for having after you discuss all of the different ROIs that we have, and we are a little bit more familiar with that and the way that they work. And I don't know, just a thought.
So next week you're for your but
what if we did it Tuesday instead of Monday? Are people available on Tuesday instead of Monday?
Do you mean just next week or in general?
Just next week.
No problem. Let me check quickly.
Next two.
Yep, no problem.
Oh yeah, actually that'll be better.
Should we switch it to Tuesdays?
No. Just next week.
And then just quickly, just to keep things on our minds, the other two things that I was thinking was at some point Alfonso was going to talk about thresholding and all the different methods. And another thing we said we would do is take Alfonso had a set of slides that goes through all the second level kind of designs that we wanted to. We have loads of examples, but we want to make it more specific to the kind of stuff that we've been doing, or putting in the kind of questions we're answering. And I don't know that we necessarily need to do that at this time, but if we just set up a time for us all, I think collectively to work on it, and then maybe we can walk through what we think is right with Alfonso, and then he can let us know,
Yeah.
Because it feels like we're getting to a point where we're almost wrapping up these studies, but I think it will be a lost opportunity if we don't do these things before we end, and then we start new studies and we again have no idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, I like that idea. Yep. And so should we just make that one of the? Should we make that these meetings?
I think that makes sense, because I think now we're kind of in a routine of Monday mornings is what we do. So.
Yeah. The other thing I think it would be good to do, Alfonso, is just like maybe circle back once we feel like we've wrapped up the ROI stuff, and maybe have a meeting where we go through it like in a tutorial fashion go through like what should be in the config files and what's the
like a summary of everything we've kind of like walked through them, right?
I feel like this has been sort of more of a group project.
Yeah, it's evolved.
It's evolved.
Kind of bookending it.
And every time, bookend it, because as we talked about it, there have just been these, the fact that it's the A study that is the study where we've addressed subject-specific ROIs. It's probably somewhat unfortunate from,
like a normal study point of view.
There's a lot of diversions.
Right, from what anybody else would do.
It's sort of like someone asking, what's a movie? I've never heard of that. And you're like, here's Gone with the Wind.
Yeah.
Cool. So that should keep us busy for the next month.
I think so. I think that would do it. The next couple Mondays are tricky, and then I'm on vacation for part of August, so maybe you should try to make a point of getting some traction on updating that file on those slides before mid-August. And I'll work on having something. I'll probably just listen to the video and repeat what I said today on Monday.
Seems reasonable. Yeah, right.
Which I think we're probably at the point where I should stop recording them.
Yeah.
Every time I thought about it, something important